Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show always trying to sum itself up in just a few adjectives. My name is Christy Powell, and I'm joined tonight by two incredible minds I admire as more than just the sum of their content. Welcome back, host Sinn Sage.
Hello, hello.
And Kara Griffin.
Hey, glad to be here. Well, as you know, tonight we're giving an elevator pitch on ourselves. So give us a call with your stories and questions at 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/callsex because the show is coming right now.
Well, you two certainly know how this works, so let's jump right into it. Sinn, what's got you turned on right now?
Yeah, so I remember hearing back when the first vaccines were coming out that some people were having an unexpected side effect of being a little horny when they come back from getting their first injection. And I will say
internet vaccine conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I guess it's a conspiracy to get
I like this one a little better.
Yeah, because this one, like, the first time I got my very first shot, that day I went and shot some content. And normally, like, I do just like one sex scene or something. But this time I was doing some trade and we ended up doing 3 scenes that day. And like, I was just like on fire. I was ready to go. I was feeling really sexual. And so I just got my second round of boosters, I think is where we're at.
Yeah, that's something to turn you on. You can stay safe through all of this. Glad to hear it.
Yep. And so I had it and it made me feel great. And I was like a little pop in with energy and feeling sexual. So, you know, don't knock it till you go get it. You never know. You might just want to.
Being safe is hot.
Yeah, fair to say.
Yeah,
those things definitely have knocked me on my ass. So congratulations on that very, very rare experience. But glad to hear it.
You never know.
I'm a little jealous. I'm gonna go try it. I doubt I'm gonna have your same experience, but you know,
just be open to possibilities. Anything is possible.
Yeah. I might like it this time.
Exactly.
Well, Kara, what's got you turned on right now?
Oh man. Okay. So rather than tell y'all about yet another book, which is, you know, what I seem to do every week, instead, what's turning me on is working out. You know, I've been traveling a lot for work lately, and I got a little bit off of my routine and found that was a little bit stressful. And then I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to go back to when I wake up in the morning, first thing I'm going to do is work out. And let me tell you, not only do I just feel better during the day, but I don't know about y'all, but I'm a whole lot hornier when I'm working out.
Yeah. No, there's great science on it, right? Like it's very grounding. It is going to help boost mood. It helps to settle your nervous system. Not to mention, you know, just your experience of your body and that sense of like connectedness. Yeah. Glad to hear it.
So, like, get your health advice here, y'all.
Yeah, right.
Get vaccinated, work out, you know. Christy, are you going to tell us to drink more water? Or,
yeah, I mean, sure. No, probably not a bad plan. I'm not going to, you know, get too far out over my skis, but I will definitely say that the number of people who come into my therapy office expressing concerns over libido and why am I not horny the way that I used to be and these kinds of things. And then we start talking about it and it's like, well, yeah, you don't do any of the things that you used to do when you were, you know, going out and living your life. So get out from in front of the TV, go and do things and see if that doesn't show up for you where you want it to, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's true. Sometimes I think to myself, I'm not in the same shape that I was 10 years ago. And then I think, I haven't done anything in 3 years to be in good shape. So, not to say that everyone has to do a certain amount of exercise or anything like that, but for me personally, I feel better when I do. And there's definitely a connection there between getting up off of the couch and doing things.
Yeah,
and
use your
feeling
body so that
better.
you can use your body.
Right.
Well, I am really excited to have y'all tonight. I really enjoy when we get these episodes where it's the three of us or like folks who are part of the organization, and we get to kind of, I don't know, stare at our navels a little bit, scratch our heads, and try to answer some like big questions. And I'm very, very interested in y'all's experience here, because I recognize that I carry a lot of privilege when it comes to my identity, while at the same time, like, I am somebody who is constantly having to correct people over the phone. Like, yes, this is my speaking voice. Yes, my name is Christy. Yes, I understand that is not what you were anticipating, but here we go. We almost every week we seem to get a phone call asking the question like, hey, I just found out I'm X, and how do I tell my mom? How do I tell my husband? How do I tell my grandma? And we've done a lot to try and answer that question, and we've talked about these different labels and identities. But I guess I'm really curious about y'all's experiences of those little like microtransactions where you're having to sort of like correct somebody on the fly. Like, we don't talk as much about how to, come out to your barista, or, how to like come out to a bus driver, and whether, where those lines are. So just to give y'all a sense of what I mean, I don't necessarily lead with any of these things when I am talking to a total stranger, but there's so many different labels that end up coming up for me. When I try to meet somebody, do I immediately jump out there and express that I am queer or bisexual or pansexual or atheist, evangelical, autistic, neurodivergent, neuroqueer, polyamorous, monogamous, an activist, an abolitionist, a pacifist, a kinkster? I'm straight, I'm heteroflexible, I'm cis, I'm gender flexible, I'm subby, I'm dominant, I'm switchy. And I don't necessarily want to share that every single time I have a conversation, but I also don't want to be like misunderstood or misrepresented around these things. So phew, got that out. But, I guess my first question for the night, how do y'all decide like when and how to come out to somebody?
You mean besides listing all of our identities on the
rapid
interwebs?
fire on the internet? Yeah, no. So that is, in fact, like, I've told this story before, but that's kind of what I did, right? Was ended up making a video with the atheist community of Austin where I just like laid out all of these things that my family would be freaked out to know about me, and then ended up kind of accidentally posting that video on Facebook. And frankly, that is the coming out experience that I recommend for everybody. It was so painless. Not everybody's going to have that opportunity, though.
But what was it like, the follow-up to that? I mean, you put that on your Facebook. It sounds like you didn't mean to. And then...
I mean, I put it on my Facebook thinking that nobody was going to watch a 30-minute long video of me just talking. And when I posted it, I think I got like 2 or 3 likes and like no comments. And I was like, all right, that's how most of my Facebook posts are anyway. No big deal.
Yeah.
But then I started getting the text messages and the private messages. I mean, I ended up getting contacted by like parents, step parents. I think like I got all the way up to all 4 of them. My like 2 brothers, a sister, a ex-girlfriend, an ex-wife. Like it was pretty wild. But totally worth it.
Yeah, I have to say you definitely misunderestimated the ability of Facebook to connect to people and people's desire to watch a 30-minute video of someone speaking that they may or may not barely know.
Yeah, hey, I just appreciate that all these people are watching it, but like, you couldn't hit the like button. I know that's the dumbest part of this story to get hung up on, but come on now.
It's like 5% of the people hit the like button. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
Don't let that impact your self-esteem. It's
Sure.
not about you.
exactly. But I mean, I know what that's like a little bit. I mean, coming out, in the first time where it was like, oh shit, I am not a straight person, at
Oh,
that
chalk
younger
one
age.
up.
Yeah, not a straight person. That was a little bit more of a big deal when it happened for me because it was the 90s and things were a lot different socially. But the main thing that, I kind of relate to that in a little bit is because I did have to come out as a porn star.
Mhm.
So, like, when you're asking in the beginning, you were putting off that list, and it's just like, that's what made me think of the times that, I'm meeting like maybe a friend of a friend and we're hanging out all night. Like, I'm definitely going to tell this person. Yesterday I was on the airplane and the girl next to me like kind of started talking to me and she's like, so, oh, what do you do in Vegas? And I was like, oh, I work in the adult industry. Somebody had asked us what we were this past week. We were traveling in Chicago. We went to a music festival and I was like, we're pornographers, so, and it's like who I'm talking to, it's going to come out a little bit different every
Yeah,
time.
that's a
Um,
tricky part of it.
but I think the thing for me is that, like, with all of my various social identities, I have a lot of pride in who I am and what I do. And so I feel that when I choose to, like, to choose to, like, lie about it or minimize it or brush it off, that's a signal of me sort of saying that I have shame around it, is
Mm.
how I feel. And so I feel like it's really important for me to say what I am when somebody asks me, what do you do? Or like, who are you in these ways? It's like, well, to make it simple, I say like, I'm a pornographer. I work in the adult industry and I'm queer. Like that, that's easy for me because like, those are things that are like really huge parts of who I am as a person. But it can be like difficult to navigate. I don't think the barista at Starbucks needs to know that I'm queer or anything
Yeah,
else. But I do have
that's the
my little
tricky.
like rainbow pin on, so that's how I'm kind of like putting it out to the world. Like when I got this tattoo, I was important to me that it's rainbow. Like I wanted that on
Mhm.
my body because I did want something on my physical self that like represented my queerness so that I don't have to like say it to everyone I meet. I can just be like, hopefully they
Sure.
see this and kind of know or guess that about me. So there are
Which
things we can do like that.
Yeah, and I get like why we're not on like an earring system where you can just like look at somebody's ear and find out who they're sexually attracted to. But
Yeah.
I also kind of get the appeal to that to try and avoid some of these conversations. I mean, Kara, how do you kind of make that distinction, or where do you draw that line for yourself as to whether or not to correct somebody or come out to somebody on some of these things?
Yeah, that's a great question because, like, I'm wearing my pin tonight that has my pronouns, they,
Hmm.
them, which it's really easy to correct people on when we're in online settings like this one,
Yes.
or if we're at work in Zoom meetings and you put your pronouns right next to your name on the screen. To me, that is so much easier than having to have the sit down conversation with people, especially when a lot of people, the reaction is not necessarily going to be good. So, I
Yeah.
mean, if
Hmm.
I'm honest, I'm kind of like you, Christy, in that when I'm online, it's out there, it's open for everyone to see. If I'm in person, I do put a little bit more thought into who am I going to have this conversation with, and is it going to be worth my time? Is the juice worth the squeeze, as it
Yeah.
were?
Yeah.
um, like for example, I have this shirt, like you were saying, Sin. This is my everyone welcome shirt. When I go out and wear this shirt in public, I get more compliments. People will go out of their way to come up to me and say, I really like your shirt.
Mm.
And it's not the shirt that they like, right?
Right.
It's they're connecting with the message.
Sure.
They're like,
Yes.
oh, I'm a queer person too, or I am supportive, of
Yeah.
the community or something like that. And
Yes.
so I find it really helpful to have a signal like that, just to show people. So I'm not having to have a conversation with everybody, but the information is out there. So
Yeah.
That works for me. But it depends. Like if you're going to actually sit down and explain to somebody, that's a whole other set of considerations. Like, is this
Hmm.
really necessary to the relationship? And is it going to be worth the potential fallout and everything like that? There's a lot more sort of thought that needs to go into it. Like when I came out as non-binary to my mother,
Chalk one up.
yep. Woo. That could have gone better, and that's, I didn't necessarily choose the right circumstances. It was in the context of, please stop posting all these transphobic memes on Facebook. And
Mm-hmm.
it was
Oh
not the
man.
best circumstances for the conversation. And I can't say that it went well. Uh, so, I might redo that one differently if I had it to do
But
over
it needed
again.
to be
But
done,
I kind
right? It was important to you
it
to have
did.
that happen, whether it was the best scenario or not, because it's your mom.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it was a relationship that was important to me in which that identity had become relevant. So
Hmm.
Yes.
I did go ahead and have the conversation. Could I have done it better? Yes. But yeah, I agree, Sin. That was kind of the calculus there was we have to talk about this one way or
Yeah.
another. And so we did. But do I bring it up to every person? If I, am at the coffee shop and they're like, thank you, ma'am, am I necessarily going to go, stop, it's not ma'am?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
not.
And I
Yeah.
get that. Like I'd like to live in a world where people are not assuming your ma'amness,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you
Do
know we
not
can
assume my ma'amness.
where we can like
My mom
comfortably
just
correct
doesn't
people on
matter.
this.
Yeah.
Because I mean, culturally, we have a picture, we have an understanding. Like we've all seen that movie where there's the dramatic moment where you say like, "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," and then you have like that dramatic coming out story. But I feel like that is a story that happens to some queer people
Yeah.
one or two or maybe a handful of times over the course of a lifetime, whereas these little microtransactions are kind of every day and they do
Yeah.
get a little bit exhausting sometimes.
Yeah.
So what are some of the like other pieces of your identity? I mean, Sin, you mentioned being in the adult industry and the stigma attached with that and what it's like when
Yeah.
somebody asks like, what do you do for a living? Are
Yeah.
there other pieces like that that you don't necessarily need to announce about yourself, but you feel like you have to kind of like signal or disclose in day-to-day conversation?
Yeah, I mean, well, again, like you said, what I do for a living, and most people when they ask, oh, so what do you do there? It seems like a very casual question, but that's because you're expecting a very, you have an answer in mind, kind
Yeah,
of.
people are thinking doctor, lawyer, business executive.
Something, yeah. And so when you hear something that's very different, it's surprising, like you never know how someone's going to respond. But, it's the same thing with, well, I know, yeah, queer. When I say like I'm queer, sometimes we're like, oh, cool, that's whatever. But like, oftentimes people are like, well, what does that mean? Because
Right.
I think
Yeah.
people still don't really know exactly what that means. Oh, you're gay then? And I'm like, well, yeah, kind of like, and just and then it's like I'm gauging, do I have the conversation with this person? Like, who is this person? Do I feel like talking right now? Are we at a party? Does this make sense for me to just like engage them? But a lot of times when it comes to that word specifically, it's like, and even with my job too, like those identities of those parts of myself, like I see them as kind of like educational moments, like teaching moments, because I want to explain what queer means to me, what it might mean to other people. I want to explain, what it means to me that you met me, you realized that I was a cool person, then you asked what I did. Like how did that change you? How did that change your mind? But I think, that those are the same kinds of things, whatever the case may be, like that I'm a leftist,
Hmm.
and so maybe I'll call someone comrade in kind of just like a,
To
funny
kind of
way.
signal that. Yeah.
Yeah, to kind of similar. And then it's like, okay, well, if I get some pushback or I get some misunderstanding, then that's a moment to, at the very least, like talk to that person about myself a little bit,
Yeah.
um, and then they can maybe get a deeper understanding of me. And even if it's someone I'm not gonna see again or see regularly, like I think it's always important to like understand as many human beings as you possibly can, and hopefully that leads to an open mind.
Yeah, and I appreciate that desire to inform, to educate, to be a contributing member of society in that sense. Like I
Oh,
do
so
see it
yeah,
as like an emotional labor there.
yes, exactly. And do we
Uh,
chalk up
Yeah.
leftist?
yeah, let's throw another one up on the board. There we go, 26. Let's see how many we can get in for the night. But
Yeah.
I think that the conversation around the word queer is a important one, and one we've talked about a little bit on this show, but it is such a important word because it is that sort of shortcut. It is that sort of like, I'm queer and I don't necessarily have time to get into more of the details of it.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the adjectives that I gave at the beginning of the show are seemingly contradictory. And so I kind of use them in different circumstances. I think bipan is probably the best example of that type of like word that can be very elastic and that we might use differently in different situations. Kara, can you walk us a little bit through the argument on whether to label yourself like bisexual or pansexual and how the person you're talking to plays into that decision?
Oh, and
Yeah,
please explain
absolutely.
bipan to me as well. That's a new one for me.
Yeah, bipan is just like a portmanteau of
Bi and pan.
bisexual and pansexual
Okay.
because they're almost used interchangeably. I don't know, Kara. Let me let you take it away.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am not an expert, but as an academic, chalk one up.
Yeah, we'll throw that one on there. Sure.
Hey,
Third.
I'm claiming it. Yeah, I love to argue about words and terms, and that's something that I have to know about myself sometimes, because I think sometimes with the debate about bi versus pan, it can get into a question of, well, are we arguing semantics? Are we just talking about a theoretical difference when in fact there may not be much of a practical difference? And I think for some people, they're not as bothered with this distinction, because in practice, I think a lot of people who identify as bi and who identify as pan uh, may have a very similar perspective on things, and they don't want to be bothered with, now you're making me change the word. But to me, it is an important distinction. This is completely my opinion.
Sure.
The argument that some people make is that bisexual in some ways may erase non-binary or even trans people, and that
That's what
it
I think.
is kind of reinforcing this binary. Yeah,
I
like
feel
I am
that way
attracted
too.
to men and women. you
Mhm.
know I know bisexual people who will say, I'm not that rigid about it, that's just the term, like, stop
Sure.
bothering me about using the wrong word.
Yeah.
um, but I think for people who specifically identify as pan, they're specifically saying, it is important to note that gender isn't the issue here, or that, I might be attracted to people of all genders, and that may include more than two genders.
Yeah.
And to me, I mean, I definitely, appreciate that as someone who isn't included in the bi thing. I'm like, hey, I
Mhm.
would like to be included in the terminology. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
but I know that that's not what is necessarily meant. But I think that is the crux of the argument. Some people say that bi is not as inclusive as it should be. Whereas, then there are people who, specifically will just say, well, I am attracted to men and women, not non-binary people. And that is also an option. You
Totally.
don't have to be
Yeah.
attracted to me
I mean,
personally
it's a
or as a
valid
category.
orientation, right? Like I
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
that, but I also
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who necessarily uses it that way, right? And that's
No.
what's important for me here is words don't mean quote what we say they mean. They mean
Yeah.
what people understand them to mean. And so
Yeah.
that's why like when I'm talking to some people, I might say bisexual just because it's a shortcut to understanding where I don't have to like get into
Mm.
this nuanced debate. I understand that there are some people who will go so far as to say like, well, bi just means two. So bisexual, you could like women and you could like non-binary people, and that's fine again, but nobody talks like that. Like, I don't know anybody out in the real world community who isn't just writing a Tumblr post or having a actually debate on Facebook about these things, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Words are useful insofar as they communicate what we mean for them to communicate.
Sure. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the debate with bi versus pan has to do with people arguing over which word is the better word and maybe not understanding each other or getting a little nitpicky, although I am nitpicky. I am guilty of picking a
Yeah.
lot of nits with
Picking a lot
terms.
of
So
nits.
I'm doing
Well,
that, but
well, and that nitpicking can be valuable, right? Like, to the wider world, I am an atheist, but to certain people in the community, I am an evangelical. You know, I don't really ever introduce myself as neuroqueer, but if I'm having a conversation with somebody about gender politics and about my experience of being on the autism spectrum, I might get into a like detailed conversation about the idea of neuroqueer. So to that end, before Sinn takes us to the phones, are there any of those kinds of words where maybe you say bisexual when you mean pan, or you say some of these like broader terms that maybe you kind of switch out depending on who you're talking to?
yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Christy, on a lot of that stuff. I will in fact, a lot of times I will describe myself as agnostic when I'm talking to people, and I am an agnostic atheist. But if someone asks me, what my belief system is, they usually assume you're some religion and just ask what is your
What religion are you?
whatever.
Mhm.
I will a lot of times just shorthand agnostic. And I understand that I probably have not communicated exactly my belief system at all, but you don't necessarily always have the time or the energy, and it may not be the right circumstance to sit down and explain.
Yeah.
Now, let me draw you a chart with 4 quadrants, and we'll have knowledge on one side and belief on the other axis, and I will explain to you we're an agnostic atheist, and you just don't have time for all that nuance sometimes.
Yeah,
and so you just say the simplest word that will communicate some, the gist of what you mean to people, and just leave it at that, and they don't have the full picture, and that's okay.
And that's okay. Yeah, I definitely just default and say I'm an atheist, but when it's like, when you know what an agnostic is, and an atheist is, then when I'm technically an agnostic atheist, but like so many people think that agnostic means you're just like, well, I don't know, there could be something, and that's not exactly my attitude towards it. So I don't want to say that word because of how I know that people will think that it means, and so I will just say like atheist, unless I'm totally ready to have an hour-long philosophical conversation about belief.
Yeah, and sometimes like we do want to get out the Dawkins scale and start to like split those hairs. But
but not always.
I always tell new clients when I'm working with somebody as a therapist what to expect on their first appointment, because a lot of therapists will use a really detailed history system where they will want to go through a bunch of forms and check boxes and find out about like your great maternal aunt's relationship with alcohol, or like all of this kind of detail. And that's valuable. Like, I do care about that stuff. I do want that information. But during a lot of this conversation, we've been talking about like time and energy. And for me, I always tell people we'll get to that stuff when we get to it. I'm not worried about what it says on the form. I really just want to hear from you how you want to describe yourself to your therapist, because it just feels so much more human. And I think that that's a piece of this too.
Yeah, the humanity behind all of it. And I feel like if we are having those conversations with people, it is the humanity we're trying to reach, when we talk about our sexuality and our beliefs and all these things. Yeah, it's about that humanity.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can do it respectfully.
Well, certainly there's a lot here, but I know we've got a couple of callers on the line. Where do y'all want to go first?
Let's go with Dean. Dean from Washington State. All right.
Hi,
hello,
Ron.
Dean.
Howdy.
So yeah, I saw a poll about assumptions when I got into the live chat. So I kind of wanted to speak to the fact that we are very, very complicated people. In my life, I've gone through multiple different types of gender identities and trying to figure myself out. In my teenage years, I got really very much in that headspace of if you're a guy, then you have to be attracted to women. If you're a girl, you have to be attracted to men. But then I left the faith, and my thinking of that actually got expanded a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ran smack dab into the fact that I'm trans and have always been, but I did go through a period of my life where I was very feminine presenting, and now I'm going through HRT, and I'm running again into that idea of who am I attracted to exactly, because I find myself very much attracted to multitudes of people. The only thing I'm not attracted to is mostly their ideas.
Sure. Yeah. No, I hear that. And I mean, you are going through this experience of rediscovering yourself as you start HRT and go through that sort of second puberty experience. Hormones are going everywhere. There's a lot of shifting. I can only imagine how, I don't know, maybe exciting, but also probably a little bit chaotic that can be. Yeah.
It is very much chaotic, but I do have an understanding of myself now in my early 30s that I never had when I was in my teenage years, because that first time around was rough.
Definitely. And, I think it's rough for everyone a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a 14-year-old here at home. It's rough. It's rough for everybody.
But especially if you're going through puberty and
religion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's obviously a burden as well. But yeah, I mean, I wonder sometimes
things that get prescribed.
Yeah, and I wonder sometimes about these labels for ourselves. This is kind of what we're talking about today is, I think there are so many young people who are very intently I need to find the thing that I'm going to call myself to tell the world. But then they're just but sometimes I feel this way and sometimes I feel that way. And I just I'm here to say, almost 39, that's just gonna keep happening. For a lot of people, sometimes I feel this way more and this way less. And that's why I do say queer and a little bit of gender fluid and stuff like that, because times I feel really feminine and times I feel I want to not be very feminine, and just times I feel gosh, I'm looking at guys a little bit more when I normally don't that much, and then times where I'm I don't want to look at any guy except my husband at all, and it's just over the years that just changes and shifts a lot. So I think it's good to find something for yourself to help you put on the sweater of that label and feel comfortable. But I don't want people to put so much pressure on themselves about it. It's so life change, it's it's okay. It's all okay. That's how I feel. Just be you. I think that's what's important.
Yeah, there's just a lot that people can go through that will make their mindset change. I love that metaphor of the sweater, because, you change your clothes every day. What's to say that, your understanding about who you are and where you're coming from and why you thought the way you thought a long time ago versus how you think now is very much changing that sweater. Sometimes you might go back to the old one, as I did, after I got out of a long-term relationship, and I found out that I was actually very much suppressing who I was again, even though I didn't mean to be. And I talked to people who are under 20 a few times online, and they very much struggle with a lot of their identity issues, their sexuality. They want to know if it's okay to be a little bit more feminine as a trans guy or a little bit more masculine as a trans woman. And I think that's all acceptable and okay, and I think a lot more people should talk about that.
Agree.
Yeah, I think one of the things that sometimes stays with us with some of the the more extreme, religious upbringings is this kind of black and white thinking, and it has to be this way, and you have to have the correct answer, and that is it, and that's all, and there is no wiggle room, there is no nuance, there is no rethinking.
Male and female, he created them. Yeah.
Yeah. That's not really a realistic description of how the humans are. So, I think some of it is kind of getting that mindset sort of out of your brain, get rid of that framework. Because, like you said, there may be people who, they say, well, okay, I'm trans, but also, sometimes I feel a little bit this way or that way, or, today I'm going to put on the other sweater. I like the sweater metaphor.
Yes.
I think that's okay.
Yeah, because I did go back from having a very masculine presentation to a very feminine, and now I kind of like ride the line a little bit. And I think when you're a teenager or early 20s, all that stuff, that because the brain is not fully formed, and maybe we've gone through experiences that are very conflicting because our caregivers when we were younger told us one thing, but we feel a different way, that it's extremely confusing, confounding, especially when you're trying to figure out like who you're going to be able to date and like how comfortable they would be if you presented yourself one way and they found out you were a different way.
Right. And the thing with gender too is, it's a social construct. We talk about that a lot. It's not a real thing. It's real in the sense that we make it real, and we all get together and define and describe it in certain ways. And, at this time in this place, there are certain things we can identify that people tend to think of as feminine and certain things that people tend to think of as masculine. But these are things that we've sort of all just gotten together and sort of decided upon. So it's perfectly normal that might not be every single person's experience. And you might have, 6 things out of this pile and 2 things out of that pile. And maybe you lean more towards this pile, but there's a little bit of the other one, because it's kind of arbitrary what we put in the different piles to a large extent. So
9 billion people on the planet. We're not all going to fit into these cookie cutter roles, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it can be very difficult for some people, especially if they've gone through very difficult circumstances, to figure out exactly how they feel, because they've been probably, pushing down their emotions, their feelings, and just going with what's expected of them for a long time. And I find that's way more common with people of faith who have gotten out of their faith at some point in their life and are still kind of struggling a little bit with these questions, if you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, you have to think about
themselves what's right for them.
Yeah, and I mean, we all know that like faith it's so indoctrinated. I mean, it's what you're told from the time you come conscious in this world. So that's so ingrained into your brain and your mind and the way you think that it can take a lot of practice and like cognitive like therapy and things like this to recognize that you can let go of that binary, those rigid rules for all kinds of things. And and it sounds, Dean, like you're doing a great job of all of that. You sound very thoughtful and seems like you're on the right track.
Well, I've had about 18 or 20 years to think about this, so yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for calling in, Dean. Hopefully you have many, many, many more years to think about it as well.
So say we all. We should all be so lucky.
Yes.
Well, we've got a few more calls on the line. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Take care.
We've got a few more calls on the line, but before we jump into those, let's take a moment and see what's been going on around the rest of the ACA.
Essentially, a bunch of white, cis, hetero dudes, most of them Christian evangelicals, planted their ideological and religious flags inside the uteruses of 2 million Oklahoma women.
But I also don't want to support or encourage anyone else to help Matt Walsh profit off of this thing. If you feel like hate watching it and you like to sail the 7 seas, then that might be up your alley. If if you catch my drift. Yar.
And speaking on this, Naughty mentioned it was an at-conception abortion ban. You wouldn't see these men proposing a pre-conception abortion ban. Because a pre-conception abortion ban would ban men from masturbating to climax.
And I don't have to constantly be shamed of my life and think that there's a God watching me masturbate. And I mean, that's a small example. But
depends on how you feel about that.
Like, if you're God, what do you plan to do? You're in Kentucky, it says. Are you going to you have a big plan? I mean, the end of the world coming. What's the next step for you / God?
All right, well, let's jump back into it. Who else you've got on the line for us?
Yeah, let's see. We have got Jamie from Texas, he, him pronouns. Wondering, Jamie, why don't you tell us what you're curious about today?
Well, this is more another example of me airing out my own idiocy and weird thoughts in a public forum for people's amusement, but hopefully to spark a bit of a conversation. So
hey, that's what we do every week here.
Right?
So as I've mentioned in previous calls, I'm straight and I'm cis and I'm het. And it's all very down the middle of the road. But I do try and be an ally. But I can't stop these odd thoughts invading my brain. And recently, one of my favorite content creators on YouTube, an animator called Jaden Animations, posted a video about her journey to discovering that she's an asexual. She's ace, aero ace specifically. And my first thought, and I couldn't stop it from hitting me in the head, was like, oh man, you're missing out on all those orgasms. They're great. I enjoy them regularly. They're free, they're healthy. It's like a good sneeze, only you can do it whenever you like. And I'm just thinking, oh God, is that a terrible thing to think? I mean, but like, on the other hand, part of the whole pushback against like purity culture and all this like ridiculous puritanical nonsense that causes so much bigotry and hate and problems is like, oh, it's filthy, it's a sin, or blah. It's like, no, it's not. It's a perfectly normal function of the human body. I suggest you have one. I suggest you have several if you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say that about the orgasms with the asexual community. So, believe it or not, there are actually so many different kinds of asexual people as well. And I am best friends with a gay person who now identifies as asexual. He doesn't have any interest in having sex with other people, but his walls in his home are covered with naked men and hard cocks, and he masturbates all the time. But he has no interest in having sex with other people and having relationships with other people. None at all. So, you know, and then there's like gray ace, you know, there are people who like do every once in a while want to have sex with another person, but mostly don't. And there's like every other thing in between. So I think that like what I understand of for people who are ace and don't have orgasms, I think that they're not missing out on anything at all because they're not interested in them. Like they've probably even had a few and they're like, that's just not for me. So I think then this just gets down to like the root of so many like misunderstandings between human beings is just that like what I look at something and I am like, I cannot imagine somebody being okay with not having X, Y, or Z. Just because like I can't fathom it because I need X, Y, or Z doesn't mean that other people also are missing out because they don't have those things that I can't imagine not having. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I'm calling in. Not because I thought that I was having a rational, reasonable thought. I already knew that, oh, come on, Jim. That ain't good thinking right there. But I do like to sort of keep myself accountable. And the thing is that I guess when people quick segue, and then I'll not take any more of your time unless you want to continue this particular line of conversation. One of the issues that we have as humans is we like to group things and we like to put things in boxes, and also the symbol of the LGBTQ IA plus community is the rainbow flag, and it's like, oh, so there's several different categories. It's like, no, it's a spectrum, and like the electromagnetic spectrum, it's a continuum, and like, so like I might be tuned to like 400 hertz, but that person's tuned to 403 hertz, which is very similar but different. So yeah, it's all very much on a spectrum, and getting your mind around that is very difficult, even if you really, really try.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jamie. I also have difficulty, personally imagining what it would be like to say, never have an orgasm again. Like that seems not preferable to me. But also I think about it in terms of other kinds of preferences and experiences that I really enjoy. Like let me ask you a question. What is your opinion on Hawaiian pizza?
The internet's favorite argument.
Yeah.
I can understand it. I actually have several thoughts on this topic. I can understand it from and you can almost call it an analogy for sexuality and the problems it can cause in families as well, because I can understand the appeal, the sweet and the salt. I find that it's kind of a bit like that isn't actually Hawaiian food. It's not a Hawaiian pizza. It's just a pizza with pineapple on it.
That is actually kind of an important thing to throw out about this debate. I hate to be that guy. It's a little colonialist, but okay.
It is.
Anyhow.
It is. I love how nuanced this got real fast.
It really is, yeah.
Centuries.
It is delicious.
Yeah, so
but,
some people can find it delicious, and I can understand why. However, I wasn't that much of a fan, but my sisters both loved it, and since we're only getting one pizza between the three of us kids, I had to have it. Whether I wanted it or I wanted Meat Feast, but no. We're only buying one pizza for you kids, so majority rules.
Yeah. So you had to have that sweet, sour, tangy pineapple exploding in your mouth when what you actually wanted was sausage in your mouth. And
I think we just call it sausage.
Sausage, yeah. It's hard for me to understand not wanting to enjoy that pineapple goodness on a pizza, and I think people are missing out. But some people don't feel the same way about pineapple as I do.
Yeah.
You actually made my point better, though.
Yeah.
And then it's I think about I have a family member, an older family member, and it's just like a little personality flaw of hers that she's just like, oh, but you don't want it that way. Here, you want it this way. And, oh, no, don't you want to put the da-da-da on your da-da? And I'm just like, I just want it the way I want it. Thanks.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just important to sort of keep that in mind when we're thinking about other people's sexualities in general. It's just like, wait, you're a what? You what do you like to do? You like cupcake batter on your nipples? That's so weird. It's just like, yeah, maybe it's weird for me and you, but for them, that's what floats their boat. So just sort of being accepting of that, I guess, which it sounds like you totally are. You kind of understand the answer already to your question. It sounds like.
Yeah, like I say, it's just a conversation starter and keep myself accountable. And also understanding, and one of the things we always trip up on, I've tripped up on a bit myself, is that people can change. You don't have to be the same thing forever. Like your last caller,
exactly.
I felt one way, then another, and it took me a time. So, for example, I was in love with being in love. I was very romantic in my 20s, and I've been through a bit of a rough patch, and it's kind of turned me off romance for now, and I consider myself aromantic at the moment. I have a lot of love in me. It comes out as dad energy. I want to dad everyone, and not in a sort of creepy way, in a kind of now there, son, let me tell you, don't put your nipples in the toaster. That's a no-no. But I have this sort of protective paternal love in me.
Yeah.
But that might change again. Who knows?
And I think that's a beautiful part of existing and having a life here on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Embracing
Well, we
that.
have religion and the internet, and on those two places, you're not allowed to have nuance. Did you know that? No nuance
Yeah.
allowed.
Right. We're probably blowing up the chat comments right now with pineapple on pizza.
I know.
Yeah, I didn't mean to start a war, but sometimes
It's not your fault.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much
take
for
care.
calling in, Jamie. And yeah, we forgot to chalk one up for Ace, of course.
Yeah,
Ace,
let's throw that
right?
up on the board. All right, we're up to 33 now.
I don't know if we had Aero in that original list. Yeah, that's another one. Aromantic. There you go.
Look at us go.
Yeah, you said grayscale. We'll make it 35.
Mhm. All right, and let's see. We have another caller from Ohio. This will be Red.
Mm-hmm.
She, they pronouns. How are you doing, Red?
I'm doing fine, just a bit confused.
Hopefully we can help, but yeah, I think we all are.
Yeah. What you got?
So mostly my confusion is on how I'm wording this question, because I don't know if I'm wording it right. I do want to start off by saying I do feel pretty comfortable as what I identify as. I'm just having trouble figuring out how I should describe that, what I am to other people, because I feel like it's this really niche thing that if I tell people, they're going to like, you're a what?
Sure.
So how would you describe it?
I identify. So currently, I identify as a bi demisexual demi-girl.
Mm-hmm.
A friend was helping me figure out what I identified as when I was discovering my gender and my sexuality and stuff. The demi part was where I come to the conclusion about that is I've never felt any attraction to any sort of other human being. Like, people would say, oh, look, that person, they're so hot or they're sexy. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't feel that way. And they said, oh, maybe it's not your type, but I never had a type. And literally when people ask me what my type is, it's my boyfriend. And it's not just people that look like my boyfriend. It's just him, because I only feel attraction towards him. So I kind of have that ace, I guess that's what it's called. So you kind of see how I'm confused about telling people what I am and how to express that to people.
It doesn't sound like you're ace. Well, asexual, just they don't feel like sexual attraction to anyone.
Okay.
Right. So that was maybe the demi-sexual part of it, because you feel like you are attracted to some people, or maybe people once you get to know them.
Yeah,
a
your
fair bit.
Personality.
Yeah. Which is then I suppose for the audience a important distinction from demi-girl, because if demisexual is I am, and let's go ahead and I guess chalk up three more here.
Yeah.
But a demi-girl would usually be somebody who identifies as a woman or as a demi-girl, but who also identifies as being agender, or perhaps somewhere in the middle of that part of the spectrum. Does that line up with how you mean to represent yourself, Red?
Yes, I don't. The way I kind of see it is that I'm okay with being called a she. I'm fine with my current assigned gender at birth, but I don't fully see myself as a girl, but I don't also fully see myself as a man. So I kind of just like the demigirl seems like the most sense to me to place myself at, because I don't fully identify as either.
Yeah, and I mean that sounds right.
I see. I think I get. Yeah.
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 Kara,
It sounds like maybe is part of the thing that you're wondering about is like, to what extent do you need to unpack that for people when you're describing it to them? Like,
yeah.
How?
Because I know if I go to my grandmother with it, she'd be like, "What?"
Well,
Maybe
yeah,
grandma doesn't
I
have to have
get that.
conversation.
Yeah, so that's why you tell grandma bisexual and you tell your queer friends that, you're a cat girl, blah, blah, blah. Like you get into
Yeah,
the
yeah.
pansexual nuance and all of those kinds of things. That's super valid, right? Like you're
Totally.
allowed to code switch in that way and
Yeah,
to
code switching.
describe yourself in a way that people understand you. You're not being deceptive or manipulative when you shorthand yourself, because the goal is not to give everybody like your genetic code. Like you don't have to walk up to people and offer a blood sample when you describe yourself. Your goal is to be understood by your fellow man, and you can accomplish that in whatever way is best to accomplish that.
Yeah, I love how you
Yeah,
said that, Christy. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Red.
Oh no, I was just saying that. Yeah, I that kind of helps me understand it. It's just that when I talk to people, I feel like I have to overgive information. It's more like I have ADHD, so I feel the need to fill in as much information as possible so people don't be misinformed about me or whatnot. It's just this weird thought process that I have with people. I'm very socially awkward.
Well, and we can normalize that a little bit, Red. I don't mean to tell you about yourself, but it's a really, really common trauma response for people who exist as neurodivergent in our very neurotypical world to feel constantly misunderstood and then to perhaps overcompensate by feeling the need to give all of this nuance and all of this detail. And that's okay. Right? Like it may not always be in your best interest. It may be an instinct to curb or to be aware of, but it's also deeply human and very understandable and very valid. So I hope that you wouldn't go around feeling like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm this broken person. Why am I such a weird gender that I have to do all of this talking about? And then I don't know how to. I don't mean to imply that that's what your inner critic is saying or that that's how you talk to yourself, but only to say if you did, you certainly wouldn't be alone. And I would hope that you would give yourself permission to just be you and to be the best you that you can without feeling like you need to beat yourself up over who you're not.
Yeah, I can definitely say you kind of hit on the nail on the head there. It's definitely what I resonate with was beating myself up. Thankfully, I've been going to therapy and been helping myself as far as that, and it's been going along great so far. I just came from a conservative family where they didn't believe in like mental health issues. They're also very bigoted, so I wasn't allowed to express myself the way I was. So I do carry a lot of trauma with that, but I'm trying to get better, and that's partially why I wanted to call and try to see if I can understand myself better, if I bounce off my idea of what I think I am to other people and see if they can help me describe it in a way.
Yeah, I felt like I fully understood, yeah.
Yeah, I understood exactly what you meant too, and or I feel like I understood. I don't know for sure. That's the problem with communication. We're never 100% sure. But I think also it kind of depends on your audience, right? Like there's people that you probably feel a lot safer being vulnerable with and describing yourself in detail and bouncing that back and forth. And then there may be other people where that's not going to be as safe or as comfortable as of a conversation. And that's okay if you don't have that conversation in quite as much detail with your grandma or, the barista or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it makes sense to sort of just find a term that's easy for you to use when you find yourself in those situations, like just saying
queer. It's the most beautiful word in the world. It gets you out of so many uncomfortable conversations.
And it's also like, I feel like queer addresses gender and sexuality and relationship models and stuff, in my opinion. So I think it can be really easy to just sort of say that and then like move on with your day, you know. And then if you're talking to other queer people, you know, then you can say, well, I'm demisexual and I'm a demi girl, and you can go on as much as you want, because other queer people are definitely going to like understand that. But it's awesome that you're narrowing that down and exploring those concepts. And yeah, thank you so much for calling in, Red.
Thank you so much for helping me out with this. This has really helped me open my head to a lot of different ways of thinking for this.
Hey, glad to hear it.
We love that. That's what it's all about. Okay, and so let's see. Let's take Grok has been waiting. Grok is from the USA. And hi, Grok, what's your question?
My question is, how do transgender people know they're transgender?
Yeah.
Well,
fair question.
How do
I guess
people know they're cisgender?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna jump in with. You know, it's one of those things where it's gonna be different for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, was there an age
Do you have
that
a personal connection to
Yeah.
this? Sorry.
Sort of. I've always grown up thinking that men and women were supposed to be treated equally. And I never saw gender as something that was like very important. So I've always thought of myself as more like agender or non-gendered as I was growing up, but it's not really an issue. And I just don't think it, you know, like cisgender, you ask, how do I know I'm cisgender? Well, I think that question is redundant. The term is redundant. You know, like, how do I know that air is a gas? It's kind of in the definition.
I think
Yeah,
it's like
not so sure that it is though. Like air is just the like vague nebulous term that we use to describe the space around us. You know, the idea of cisgender is just to say that you have a gender just like a trans person has a gender, but your gender happens to line up with the way society describes your gender. So without a society, we don't have cis and trans. We just have men and women, and then, you know, some of these other like more nuanced identities. But the notion that cis is somehow the default is a culturally constructed one, and one that is not based on biology and not particularly useful anymore. So it's something that we are working to sort of deconstruct culturally.
Yeah, and I think that because, you know,
completely agree.
in your experiences, you have had a certain set of experiences and you were raised a certain way, and that shaped you as a person, as an adult. But you know, we have to keep in mind that like that doesn't mean that it's the same for every other person. So, you know, as I've always been attracted to, you know, all the genders. So it's hard for me to sort of put my head, my mind into the space of someone who's only attracted to one gender. But that doesn't mean that I'm incapable of like having empathy for that person. It's just like I can't really relate to that, but I still can have empathy for that experience. I can just realize that that's a valid way of being, just because it's not something that like I personally can relate to. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I would say that sexual attraction is a little more nuanced than gender.
100% agree.
But the idea that, you know, gender is a socially constructed idea. So what does it mean to be a gender? What are you identifying as when you say I'm a woman or I'm a man? You know, how does that relate to yourself versus the societal definitions of gender?
So I think, I don't know if I'm understanding you correctly or not, but you let me know. Sometimes I've had conversations with my brother where he's asked me questions, kind of trying to understand more about my experience as a non binary person. I don't really strongly identify with masculinity or femininity in either way. And he has asked me before kind of about this question of, well, if it's socially constructed, is it real that you're non-binary? If gender's not real, is your gender identity real? I don't know if that might be what you're asking. And he's asked me before, well, if we had grown up in different circumstances in a household that wasn't so strict about gender roles and that didn't force femininity onto you, do you think that you would have grown up and identified as non-binary? And my answer to that had to be, well, I don't know, because my experience is what it is. I can't say what I would be like if I had had a different one. But I think that it's a good point to some extent, in that, yes, gender is something that is to an extent made up, in that it's whatever the society says about it in the time and the place that you grew up does define what the meanings of those terms are for you. And so your internal sense of identity and your external expression of gender is always going to be a reaction to, a response to those categories that are set up in the society that you're living in. So if you lived in a different place in a different time that defined genders in a different way, maybe you would fit into a different box. You would be in the other box that those people were describing for the humans, and maybe they have 4 boxes to pick from, or 1.5 boxes, or 6 boxes, or whatever. So it's not a real thing, in the sense. I guess what I'm saying is, it may always be a little bit contingent upon what the societal understandings are. It's not that you don't have an internal sense, you do, but how that fits with the societal expectations is going to depend on what the societal expectations are. Does that speak
Correct.
to it?
I'm looking at it scientifically. I want to know.
Yeah, so am I.
How can you say you're a man in a woman's body, or vice versa?
We don't, right? Like,
Because
if
my view
you
on
have
it,
I'm gonna go ahead and jump in, Grok, because I don't want to talk over you, and I don't want to have the social sciences dismissed as not being sciences, because when we're talking about gender, we are talking about a social construct. It is, like Kara is saying, made up in the same way that money is made up, in the same way that, like, the concept of nationhood is made up. Like, Russia's not real. It's just a, line that we have drawn on a map socially, right? It's not a hard science kind of real. It's not a physics kind of real, but Russia is very much a real place. So that's an important thing to hold on to here, and to recognize also that notion of a man trapped in a woman's body and vice versa is just remarkably ignorant of the actual experiences of actual trans people. I'll pull back and let y'all weigh in, and then we can take Grok off mute and jump back into the conversation. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, of course. But that's, I lost my thought. Please, Karen.
Sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I really think, yeah, Christy, you described it really well. And something else that I'm hearing a little bit of, something that I struggled with too, again, sometimes some of us grow up hearing definitions being described in such a way that makes it more difficult to understand the concept, because I know there are a lot of people that will say, for example, well, sex and gender are 2 words that refer to the same thing. And if that were true, it would be really hard then to say that, well, my sex is this, but my gender is something else, because if those 2 things were one and the same, you couldn't do that. But, I do want to make the distinction as it is described in the sciences, which I have studied extensively, am considered an expert. I don't call myself an expert, and I'm not, an expert on anything. But, if we're going to call people out on you're not reporting the science, what we are describing here is consistent with the social sciences and the biological sciences. And I want to make a distinction between, the biological sciences and the social sciences here as it relates to sex and gender. A lot of times when we're talking about sex, we're talking about physiological characteristics, whether it's genitalia, whether it's chromosomes, whether it's hormones, all those kinds of things. When you're talking about sex, that's a lot of times what people are referring to when they say, I was assigned female at birth or I was assigned male at birth. It's usually referring to those things.
Well,
there's a little bit more
to interrupt
squishiness
you
in there.
Yeah, I apologize for interrupting what you're saying, but even that, like that notion of assigned is a social one based on the perceived congruence of gametes, of chromosomes, of hormones, even though those things may or may not actually line up in a binary way.
And that happens
Exactly.
all the
Yes.
time.
We have this. Yeah, there's this sense, I think, of comfort we get from, being able to say, according to science, it's X. Well, science isn't actually that precise a lot of the time. And it turns out there's a lot of people whose external body parts don't necessarily align with what we would expect their chromosomes to be based on what they have, or what their hormone levels might be based on those things. So that is already in and of itself a little bit squishy and not binary. There are intersex people. There are people that don't fit neatly into what we expect the categories to be for biologically male or biologically female, heavy air quotes. That's already ambiguous. Set that aside for a second and go to gender. That's the social part. That's the part that has to do with how we express ourselves externally, as well as how we identify inside of ourselves. Like, how do I make my voice sound when I speak to people? How do I dress? How do I cut my hair? How do I feel? That's the part that people are talking about when they're talking about gender. And that's not something that you can tell someone, oh, well, it's science, you don't feel the way you feel, or you didn't cut your hair the way you cut it. Yes, you did. You can't just take that away from people by saying it's not scientific, because you are observing it. It's different from the category that we usually call sex, although they're certainly related. So I just wanted to make that distinction, that they're not one and the same thing. And that's why people can be trans or non-binary or cis or anything. And that's why we have those terms, because not everyone aligns with what society might be expecting based on what they were assigned at birth. And I know that might be a little bit basic, but I wanted to put that out there in case there was any confusion. So Christy, feel free to
okay, well,
add or subtract.
I kind of feel like I was cut off and kind of jumped on a little bit because there was a bit of a misunderstanding when I said something about scientific. Social sciences, obviously the study of how people behave. So scientifically speaking, wouldn't you say that if a male human has a thought, that thought informs social sciences more than what social sciences inform that person?
I would not say that. I don't think I followed what you said.
Yeah, try again.
Like at all. Can you try that again?
And I'm a male. If I have a thought and I'm a male, doesn't that mean that I'm having the thoughts of a male? How can I ever say that I'm having the thoughts of a woman if gender is a social construct?
If you are a male, then yes, your thoughts are male, but perhaps you are not male. What if you weren't a male? Then your thoughts wouldn't be male, right?
How do you know that? How could you know that?
Right, exactly. How could you know that about anybody but your fucking self? Because even with yourself, it's really squishy and hard. Okay, I believe you. You told me you're male, so I'm going to take it for granted that you know yourself better than I could possibly know you. So you've told me you're a male. So you can't really know that you're, quote, male. That's a very squishy category, but to the best of your ability, you have decided, looking at all of the evidence, that you understand yourself to be male. Great. Congratulations. That's going to make a lot of your life a lot easier in a lot of ways. So good on you. But you have decided that you're a male. I don't get to decide that you're a male. I don't get to decide that you are in anything, nor do you get to decide what I am, what Kara, Sinn, or anybody else is, because you are not in their heads. we cannot get into people's heads. We cannot measure or evaluate their maleness or their non-maleness. We sincerely can't. We can look at their hormone levels. We can look at their gametes. We can look at their chromosomes. We can look at their BMI. We can look at all of these different factors. But even those don't line up. There's some statistical concordance, but on a planet with 8 billion people, there's a ton of outliers. And the notion that there is a male box and a female box is honestly something that we have talked to so many experts, so much smarter than I am on these subjects on this show about over and over and over. So I will just say it this way, Grok, the evidence is out there. It's in the back catalog of this show. You don't have to scour the internet. You can just keep watching this YouTube channel and have all of these questions answered by medical doctors, by biological researchers, by a number of different chemists and social scientists. We have talked to so many brilliant people about a lot of this information in great detail. And if you want to learn about it, you have every opportunity in the world. I just ask that you go and do it and not sit here and insist that you know what it is to be male, because you've only had that one experience and you can't really speak to anybody else's experience. Is that all fair?
Well, I think you might be conflating terms, because I understand your concept of atypical gender or atypical sex, that a person's physical body might not match other characteristics. That's all understandable. But that's the exception that proves the rule. So we have a separate—
Sure. Okay. So we're just going to label people as exceptions rather than persons. We're going to dismiss their personal experience. I mean, I don't mean to speak for Sinn and Kara, but I feel a little offended on your behalf, Kara, as a exception. I mean, let me let you weigh in here if I may.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I do exist. I am a person. I'm here right now. If that's not empirical evidence, I don't know what is. I think that I exist scientifically, although, maybe that's more of a philosophical question that we need to get into. But yeah, this idea that, well, just because it's a small number of people doesn't mean it's not a number of people. Those are still people.
And how small are these numbers in actuality? I mean, there's reason to believe that as much as 20% of the population is queer in some broad scope. So there's a lot here. Grok, I'm gonna give you the last word, but we are getting closer to the end of the show. And sincerely, I'm telling you, we have answered this question so many times, and I don't mean to be impatient with you, but I'm a little bit impatient with the world right now, because there is a willful ignorance on this topic. The information is so readily available, and to refuse to understand it is just frustrating when it ends up hurting people who are impacted by this kind of ignorance.
The willful ignorance.
Well, I see that your emotion seems to be skewing the conversation, because I'm speaking on a strictly neutral basis.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I wasn't attempting to dismiss anybody and their identity or who they are. And I just want to, put it like this. If I have a machine that makes white squares and black squares, and one day I find that there is a gray square in the pile, does me identifying a gray square and saying that is an exception to what the machine normally does, is that now disregarding the white and black squares? Or am I disregarding the gray square because I am saying that it's supposed to be white or black? And
I'm really excited for you to go back and watch this clip after the fact, Grok, so you can hear how you sound to us here. I appreciate your attempts at civility, but I think we're going to leave it there for tonight.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Thank
Can
you.
we chalk one up for gray square?
Yeah, let's throw gray square up on the board.
Gray
All right.
square. Yes.
Sure.
I'm just like, I think the machine was actually always making many different shades of gray
Yeah,
squares,
is God
and
the
you can list all
machine?
those.
I don't really
Yes.
know how any of that quite works. I definitely don't mean to get hot on the under the collar, and I don't want for emotion to get in the way of understanding an intellectual debate. But these are not purely intellectual debates. These are human discussions about actual persons, and I think it's really, really dangerous to suggest that a fixed view of the world is something that you can just like play around with, that you can sort of insist over other people's personal experiences.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and I've seen
Right.
that too with people saying like, "Oh yeah, well, but intersex people are only like, 5% of the population or something like." And I'm just like, "So does that mean that they're not real beings that exist on this planet? And like the way you talk about things and the way we legislate things like should just behave as though they don't exist?"
Yeah.
I can't get behind that.
On behalf of millions of gray squares all over the world, fuck off with that noise.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. We've had some really good times with the calls tonight. Gotten a little bit off track on some of the pieces of our discussion, but ultimately, I guess I want to ask y'all before we wrap up for the night: why do any of these labels matter? Why are we really just like fragmenting ourselves when we go from having black squares and white squares to having gray squares? If we start talking about the dark black squares and the slightly darker black squares, are we just fragmenting ourselves and causing a bunch of like strife? Or is the value here? Or is there value in here? And where is that value?
Yeah, I am really glad you asked that. I want to thank Grok for calling in and kind of making this point, actually, which part of which is, the need for some of these labels, in my opinion, is that without them, sometimes people can tend to be erased
Yeah.
and maybe go through life thinking, oh, well, it must just be that there's something wrong with me. There's these two kinds of people, and I'm not either one of those. I must be broken. And if you go through your life just not realizing that there's other people who are like you, not realizing that, oh, there's actually a term for this, and there's other people who feel the same way, and there's a community of people that understand you and are like you, and this is real, then that it's actually really helpful to have that, to be able to put a name to something that is real, but that is difficult to talk about if people don't give you the language to do so, or if you don't create the language to do so, because there unfortunately are people in the world who want to have it a certain way. And when they encounter people who do not comport with their view of reality, they want to pretend like those people aren't real and brush them aside and dismiss them. And, oh, well, you have a birth defect, you don't count. Or, oh, you're confused about yourself, you don't count. But if you have labels for things, then it becomes easier to communicate to people what you're describing, but it also becomes easier for other people to speak up and say, yeah, actually, that's me too. Also me. And you can then actually count people and find out there's a lot of gray squares out here. It wasn't just one that accidentally came out. There's a bunch of us.
Many different
So
shades.
I think labels are that way.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
And I think the other thing that's really important that labels help us do is find community. Just going off that same idea, it's like, and the internet has been amazing for that too. But it's just, well, if I want to find other people who are queer, other people who are atheists, other people who are porn stars, I mean, all these things, because it can feel really isolating to sit in your own identity and not really feel connected to other people who might have that same identity. It can be just to find that community using those labels, and then you understand yourself a little bit better, like with the demisexual thing, like maybe for the longest time they didn't really understand exactly what their attraction was or how it worked, but then to find that label and then read the definition of it and be like, oh my gosh, that's me, and I can't say how many times I have done that with a variety of different things. Like, when I found Stoicism as a philosophy, and I'm reading about Stoicism, and I was like, oh shit, that's me. Like, I kind of already think most of these things. Then I was able to get more into Stoicism, read more about it, and apply more of it to my life, and have it become even more like meaningful to me. And so I think in that way, that's how like labels and these things can help.
Mhm.
But I do think that, again, it can be, if we're too wrapped up in what the labels are and we've got to go find them all, or else we don't have an identity, I think that can be a problem too. Like, you're
Sure.
still you,
Yeah.
and, find the things that resonate with you now. If they change later, that's okay.
Yeah, I know that we're, just about done for the night, but I think that demisexual is maybe the best, easy, readily available example for this kind of thing, because particularly a woman growing up in America right now likely has been told so many different things about her sexuality and about how she's supposed to feel about the people that she's dating. And so she doesn't want to be a slut because that's gross and disgusting, but she also doesn't want to be a prude. And she knows that she's attracted to people, but then she goes out on these dates and nobody is really clicking on that first or second or third date. Maybe she's having a good time and she feels a romantic connection, but there's not that same sexual desire. And does that mean that this just isn't the person for me? Does that mean that there's something broken about me? But I know that I like to have sex. I enjoyed having sex with that one partner a couple of years ago. And so what is wrong with me? And then you are introduced to the idea of demisexuality, and somebody explains to you that you have a full and vibrant sexuality. However, you aren't maybe attracted to people as instantaneously as a number of your peers are. So here's a way to understand yourself. Here is a community that is like you. And now here's a strategy, because all you really need to do is maybe stick it out until date 15 or 20. I'm not trying to put a universal number on it, but if you're demisexual, it's going to take perhaps a little bit longer to develop that sexual attraction than it does for somebody else. And if you don't know to look for that, then you might give up after date 5 over and over and over again.
Right.
So having these labels is literally life-saving in many, many, many cases. I take your points in, and I do think that we can sometimes get caught up in identity politics, and we can, try and split that spectrum of light into so many different colors that eventually the names of the colors start to kind of lose their meaning, or at least they can.
Yeah.
But it is also really, really nice to, go into a like a makeup store and know specifically that like my shade of OPI red is called We the Female, and I know that it's going to be exactly this shade, and that's my shade, and that's me. And I just love having that opportunity and that capability. So but before Sinn starts to wrap us up and take us out for the night, are there any places y'all might point people towards to maybe learn more of these adjectives, or maybe find their adjectives? Any resources that helped you on your journey, or anything that might be useful here?
Well, let's say the Reddit for it's like LGBTQ Reddit, or queer Reddit.
A lot of self-discovery going on there.
Yes, so much. And there's so many labels that I was like, what does this even mean? And I had to go on Google and find them all out. And I was like, these are things. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Definitely. Oh, also chalk one up for stoic.
Yeah, right. I meant to say that.
Excellent. We made it to an even 40.
I like it.
Nobody identify as anything else. We're done. No.
Nobody identify as anything. Got it.
Yeah, stop identifying. No, I would also I would just add, I think those are great resources. Something I share with people a lot. It's a little bit basic, but sometimes that helps, is the Gender Unicorn. Just type into
Yeah.
Google the gender unicorn.
Great
And
place to
it's
start.
just a real simple graphic to look at that kind of explains these different aspects or components of gender and identity and expression and who you're attracted to and so on and so forth. And it's a good way to just kind of take stock and sort of understand some of the differences between these terms, between sex and gender and sexuality. And these are separate but related things, and it kind of breaks it down easily. So if you're just a little bit confused about the terms or wondering where you fall, that can be a quick and easy resource to kind of play with and have a good time and learn a few things.
That's awesome. I'm going there.
Well,
Right
I'm
after
going to throw off that symmetry and interject right before Sinn takes us out, because I have to steal something from the chat and say that I'm feeling a little bit salty tonight. And I think for now, I identify as a bitch. Let's knock it up to 41. Sinn, it's all yours.
Knock it up to 41. All right, y'all. You can keep up with what's happening with the ACA on our website at atheist-community.org. You can email this show with sex@atheist-community.org or email the ACA with tv@atheist-community.org. This Sunday, September 25th, come and join us in person if you're in the Austin area at the Free Thought Library for Talk Heathen with Objectively Dan and a surprise guest, and the Atheist Experience with Matt and Andrew Seidel. Tiny.cc/AEN podcasts is your one-stop shop where you can catch an audio version of the show. And please also find us on Facebook with the Secular Sexuality fan group. We have a Discord also. That's tiny.cc/ACD Discord. We've got some awesome merch as well. I don't know if you saw this sweet pillow behind me, but that you can find at tiny.cc/merchaca. Pillows and mugs and shirts and things like that. So show your love for the show with some merch. And we can't do any of this amazing show and the awesome things we do here without our incredible crew. So let's say hi to them and thank you so much. None of this happens without y'all. And yeah, anybody have any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with tonight?
I would just say, be whatever color square you want to be. You are a valid square. Go get
Your
it and be
square
you.
is valid. Sure. Well, I guess I will just encourage everybody to put on their pronoun pins. Maybe grab a social studies textbook, fire up your gray square machine, and give yourself a big ol' orgasm. You've earned it. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.